I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Katie Halper Show. We are so excited to be here with you. We had some tech issues with some guests, so apologies for that. But that is great because it gave you more time, hopefully, to like the stream. Give it a thumbs up. Every time you like the stream, it helps gain views, visibility for this channel. And I'm not saying that because out of like self promotion, but it's mostly because we have really important guests on and cover important stories. And we want to make sure as many people as possible see them. So please do give a like. Also, please do subscribe if you haven't already. And to do that, you just hit subscribe and then the bell. That way you won't miss any of the streams that we do or any of the extra streams that we do. We do extra streams. Usually we do them on Friday, but you never know if we drop an emergency one. And so you won't want to miss those. And the way you don't miss those is that you subscribe. Also, if you can become Patreon supporters, go to patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. For $5 a month, which is 25 cents a day, only Monday through Friday, not even 7 days a week, you get access to early content, behind-the-scenes content, extended interviews, bonus interviews. Like today's show, you will have the entire interview with Ray McGovern, where we're going to get into some very interesting stuff about Israel and some of its crimes against the United States. If you're watching live, you're in luck. You get to see it all. If you're watching later on and you want to see it all, you can find that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And if you can't swing the $5 a month level, we do hope you can become supporters at the $1 a month level. And that way you just make sure that we can keep going, because really, we literally could not do the show without your support. I hope you don't hear the dogs barking in the background, but if you do hear them barking, that is because they are encouraging you to become Patreon supporters. Okay, so we have a great show. We're going to be speaking to, in reverse order, Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst Ray McGovern. Before that, we're going to be speaking to Iranian analyst Trita Parsi. But our first guest is someone who's come on the show before, and he has really interesting things to say about some countries that we haven't covered in a while, and that's really important. So everyone, put your hands together, your virtual hands together, for our first guest, Arturo Desimone. He is a Aruban Argentine writer, artist, and active member of the social movement Llamamiento, as they say in Argentina, Llamamiento Argentino Judío. So welcome. Welcome, Arturo. How are you?
Hi, Katie. Thank you for having me. How are you?
Good, thanks. Thank you for coming. You were very excited to talk about a certain figure who is a rising star in leftist Argentine politics. Is that a fair description of her?
Yes. Well, she's, of course, Myriam Bregman has been very well known for many years, if not decades, as a lawyer, defending the interests of factory workers who did possessions of factories in Argentina, as a member of the often mocked Trotskyite left, and she began to emerge in Argentine politics in the mainstream more visibly as the Peronist center neoliberal left began to deteriorate, and the extreme right, the red left, began to blossom more in the public arena. And that process never ended, at least not for the left. Milei is... And
just so you, so people know, you said the Peronist, so that's as in Perón, right? Perón. So
right.
For people who, because this is not a Latin, I mean, we have people from Latin America watching, but not everyone's a Latin American or Argentine. So yeah, if you could just...
Right. Sorry. So yeah. Yes, Peronism is basically the tradition of left-leaning populism in all of Latin America, populism concerned with the workers and social issues. And Perón, right, more than 75 years ago, was at the end of the Second World War, was a great pioneer of this style of politics, which then began to appear all over the rest of Latin America. Many people say, for example, that Hugo Chavez was similar in some ways to Perón, although I disagree on some points, since Perón also industrialized a lot of Argentina, much more. And even people in Argentina, there was a big debate as to whether Trump is an American Perón or not, because he has a protectionist talk, even though he does not necessarily walk the talk. Right. So Peronism is basically left-leaning populism, which has had a powerful grip on the imagination of Argentinians for a very long time, since the end of the Second World War, and only recently did that begin to fragment, did that begin to splinter. And the results are Milei and the opposite, Myriam Bregman, of this leftist, red, Trotskyite, Leninist, Marxist alliance in Argentina.
Okay, we're going to get into that, but let's start. No, this is good. So let's start off by talking about who Milei is, and we're talking about Argentina. Yes. Who is Milei? He's in power now. People may recognize him from a famous moment. In fact, let's show this moment. This is Milei and the Argentine president, Milei and Elon Musk with a chainsaw at a CPAC event. Okay, so there you have the image. I'm just lowering the music so we don't get into a copyright issue. But there you have it. There's Elon Musk. It's at CPAC. And now here it comes. Here it comes.
Is he hiding behind the flag, or maybe
none other than Javier Milei, right? Okay.
Yes, the chainsaw. Yeah.
The chainsaw, yeah. So tell us about Javier Milei, who's in power right now, and why he's significant, not only in, and you can talk while we have this in the background, why he's significant not only in Argentina, but also in the rest of the world.
Right. Well, Milei, he at some point he was a very marginal figure. Then in elections in 2019, he had like 4% of the vote, and then by 2023, he had the majority of the vote, and he campaigned a lot during the pandemic with videos talking about cryptocurrency, talking about entrepreneurship, appealing to people who were shut out of people who were in the informal economy, so like small vendors and peddlers from poor neighborhoods, people like, what was the name of that man the black man who sold loose cigarettes and who was
Eric Gardner.
Right. So the Argentine equivalent of those people, like very small, merchants and hustlers, they would watch Milei's videos, and he would talk to them as if he was talking to them, as talking about the interests of entrepreneurs. But actually, Milei was only defending the interests of huge business people and huge, gigantic business interests. And so the right wing, which had many failures in Argentina, had gone out of fashion. And so then they latched on to Milei, who had this heterodox, like countercultural, like subversive appeal in order to repackage old wine in a new bottle. So Milei presented, this heretical face of the new right, but actually these are the exact same economic ideas. So the chainsaw represents austerity, slashing the entire public sector, slashing the state. But of course, the part of the state you preserve and embolden is the military and the police, of course. That's part of the state keeps growing and the rest is slashed. So this fake right-wing anarchism, the mainstream right in Argentina latched onto that. And that was seen as a sign of hope that the world would never exit this era of, Bukele, the cryptocurrency dictator in El Salvador, that the world would never leave this era of, Orban and Christopher and Christopher Rufo and J.D. Vance and all these people who have, this rebellious aura, but they are not necessarily that new in the ideas.
They support the status quo, or in some ways exacerbate it, but their style is insurgent and disruptive.
Well, they do go against part of the status quo, so against part of the centrist, academic status quo, political correctness, platitudes, neoliberal. Yeah, they attack the aesthetics of neoliberalism, but Milei fanatically holds on to the core tenets of neoliberalism, which is austerity for all, and he believes that the previous right-wing governments simply did not do the austerity well enough. Even though all previous right-wing governments who did austerity, they just got Argentina into worse and worse, deeper debts with the IMF, for example. So with Macri, the IMF debts was historic, 45...
Another Argentine president.
Yes, the previous right-wing Argentine president got the country $45 billion into debt, which is which was the record then for the entire world of debt. And now that record has been surpassed. It's more than $53 billion in debt. And so Milei's big promise was that if he starves everyone with austerity for 6 years, stagflation, Argentina, for example, now has the most expensive coffee in the world. A cup of coffee is maybe $7 or $8 or something, right? Which is, in a country where salaries are much, much lower than the average country with such costs of living, right? And Argentines are the people who have been through so many crises that part of the Argentinian culture is having all kinds of very clever ways of navigating financial crises, finding all kinds of solutions to keep your lifestyle going. But even then, there's hunger in Argentina, and people are waiting for the miracle to pay off. I think there's a Leonard Cohen song about when will the miracle come or something. And many people are still hopeful because they were very desperate, and so there was this messianic belief in Milei, who, unlike some other people who are trying to be Bukele or Milei, he is authentic. He's an authentic believer in the things he purports, and he is very theatrical, and he's very interesting in some ways. So, for example, he celebrated Margaret Thatcher, which is an extreme offense to Argentinians because of her war with Argentina over the Malvinas Islands, which is a war that in 1982 that remains an open wound in Argentine society because of the veterans who aren't that old even yet. But somehow he got away with it for a while, but he's not delivering at all on his promises. People are still waiting for the silver lining of this neoliberal miracle that many of his predecessors promised as well. The president in the 1990s, the president elected in 2015, they all promised this miracle that life would get better if only we destroyed the heritage of the populists, destroyed any social part of the state, and ingratiated the IMF, the United States, the US State Department, the US Embassy, then things would get better for Argentina, would come out of its isolation. And none of that has happened. Life has become increasingly worse for a majority. And that's why now, all of a sudden, it's as if history has is making a full turn right now at 180 degrees, because now Myriam Bregman, who is of this, the FITU, which is the alliance of red, left-wing, pro-worker parties and syndicates, she's of this front of left-wing parties that were normally made fun of or ridiculed, much in the way that in the US, maybe the Green Party, for example, was a source of mockery. And often, just as Democrats often blamed the Green Party, say, for the triumph of George W. Bush, they blamed Ralph Nader. They made him into a scapegoat. And then Bernie Sanders was afraid of becoming the next Ralph Nader style scapegoat in 2016. Well, in a similar vein, Peronism, the mainstream center left in Argentina, in order to not come to terms with the fact that they, much like the Democrats or UK Labour, have increasingly ceded territory to neoliberalism, married to also identity politics. Instead of having a kind of autopsy of their failures, they consistently blamed the radical left, the red left, the Trotskyites or Trotskos, for ruining or spoiling elections. For example, when Macri won, they said, well, that percentage of votes that were taken from Peronism that got siphoned off into the red left, that would have saved us the election, and then we wouldn't be living under Macri, which is, almost a mirror image of the discourse when George W. Bush won in Florida against Al Gore, and people blamed Ralph Nader. It's a very comparable dynamic. But this time around, nobody is laughing, or no one is mocking the red left, because right now, Myriam Bregman is at 4% of the estimates, and she, among all of the candidates, all of the prospective candidates for next year's elections, she not only has the most favorable, the most positive image, according to all polls, but also according to all polls, she has the least, disgraced image. So she has the best reputation, the least tarnished reputation. Mainly because she was always authentically just incorruptible and completely ideological from the beginning, which is sometimes the reason why the red left has failed, because they're very rigid, whereas Peronists, they play the political games, which, in Latin America does imply a certain amount of realism, meaning you accept corruption as a fact of life in politics, whereas the red left they were too puritanical to accept that kind of, realistic embrace of some corruption in order to get anywhere in politics. And that used to be a handicap in Latin American politics anywhere, but this time is actually working out to her benefit. Yeah.
Wow. Well, Arturo, we're going to have to bring you on another time, because we were so delayed by these tech issues, and we have a full show. But I mean, we did a full segment on Milei and Myriam, so we can get into some more of these issues later on another appearance. So we'll have to do it shortly.
Yes, I hope that we could also at some point talk about Colombian elections coming up, which have a Milei imitator, Abelardo de la Espriella, who's quite scary and also fond of the chainsaw, and is much more dangerous than Milei. And
oh wow, even more. And when is that election happening?
The 21st of this month. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we can bring you on even this Friday.
Sure.
But you got to get all right, and you'll do a check. You and Brad can get together an hour before the stream to set everything up.
I'm sorry about.
No, I'm kidding. No, but this has been great, and people are already excited about what you're talking about, because this story isn't getting a lot of attention here, so it's really important to do that. So, guys, stand by. We will very soon have Arturo back on the show. And that's like a nice sneak preview tease for when he comes on and talks to us about what's happening in Colombia. Thanks. Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye. All right. That was a good chunk of an interview. And we're going to talk to Arturo again very soon. We're just going to keep the show going. Also, we're going to have a great show on Friday. We're going to be talking about Bolivia also with another guest. So definitely come back on Friday. We always have great shows for you Friday during the day. Now, moving to our next guest, make sure, by the way, if you haven't already, please do like the stream. To save time, I'm not going to check. Oh my God, guys, not even half of you have liked yet. That is ridiculous. Like the stream. By the next time I take a look, this better be up by a lot, or else I'm gonna leave this interview like Donald Trump left the Meet the Press interview.
Or you will turn this broadcast around right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry, that was like what the parents say in the car. Like, if you kids don't quiet down, I will turn this car around.
Yes. Give a thumbs up if you got that joke, because I'm curious how slow I am. But anyway, all right, we're going to bring on our next guest. Very excited to bring back onto the show the wonderful Trita Parsi, Executive Vice President of the Quincy Institute. Welcome back, Trita.
Thank you so much. Great to be with you again.
Thank you. So you are incredibly busy. I got to say, people who talk about Iran, you guys really have your work cut out for you, because the work, the news there is just nonstop, and it becomes it's changing so rapidly. I guess that's kind of what happens when you have someone like Donald Trump in power, and you have a country that is actually fighting back. So just today, Trump posted to Truth Social to announce, quote, and we have it here. I have just been informed by our great military that last night the Iranians shot down one of our highly sophisticated Apache helicopters while patrolling over the Strait of Hormuz. There were 2 pilots involved. Both are safe and uninjured. Nevertheless, the United States must, of necessity, respond to this attack. Thank you for your attention to this matter, President Donald J. Trump. So what are we to make of this?
So again, like many of these other incidents, we don't have full details in the early stages. And even for some times, details may remain very murky. I mean, I'm sure you remember the other incident. This is several weeks ago. This is while the war was still raging formally, in which 2 pilots apparently had been shot down inside of Iran. Still to this day, we don't know the details. We don't know the names of the pilots. We know very little. So keeping that in mind, I think we should take all details coming out from all sides with a grain of salt. It's not clear whether that drone that apparently brought down the helicopter did so intentionally or not. But nevertheless, Trump is acting as if it was deliberate, and as a result has started to strike at several different air defense sites in Iran. And the question, of course, is this going to be a proportionate response? The US says that it's self-defense, that it is proportionate. But of course, the Iranians have a say in how they view this. And if they do not view it as such, and even if they do, there's a likelihood that they will retaliate. And the calibration of the responses are going to be tremendously important, because if there's any miscalculation, miscalibration, and for instance, either side actually kills some servicemen, then you're going to see an even greater escalation. It's going to be very problematic. And this shows you how sensitive and fragile the situation is, because the 2 militaries are deep inside of each other's spheres right now. And it's not a surprise that these things just seem to happen every 2 or 3 days at this point.
Right. And this comes after, over the weekend, Iran struck Israel in retaliation against Israel striking Beirut. Then Israel responded, which prompted Iran to respond again. And that was like kind of the end of this round of skirmishes, I guess. And so what is the significance of this latest escalation, in particular, Iran striking Israel on behalf of another country that was hit by Israel, right? So they did this on behalf of Lebanon, basically.
Exactly. So this is very significant in 2 ways. One is the fact that the Iranians are now saying that they've already restored their own deterrence. They know the Israelis will not attack them without knowing that they will get attacked in turn. But now they're trying to extend that deterrence onto Lebanon as well. And that has not happened before. Now, this where the second part comes in. If they succeed in establishing what the Israelis call a new equation, which is that whenever Israel thinks about striking Lebanon, it will have to think twice, because it will come with a cost. The Iranians may or may not retaliate against such a strike. This will give the Israelis pause. Their total maneuverability will now be somewhat restricted. The manner in which they've been able to act with complete impunity in Gaza, in West Bank, etc., and in Lebanon, of course, may come to an end. It doesn't mean that they will stop. It doesn't mean that they can't strike. It just means that there's a cost associated with it now. And that may cause them every once in a while to choose not to. Again, if this new equation is established, it's not clear at this point if it is. There's 2 points that are interesting, though. One is that after the Iranians struck Israel, the second time the Israelis did not strike back. Secondly, they did strike Lebanon afterwards, but not Beirut. They struck southern Lebanon. And it's in some ways perhaps a test to see, are the Iranians serious about saying that all of Lebanon is now protected by them? Or is it only Beirut and specific neighborhoods, frankly, in Beirut that are very important to the Iranians? And the Israelis may have been testing that to see. And then there's another element here, which is sometimes the Israelis back off for a couple of days because Trump is angry, because he's putting pressure on them. But in 3 or 4 days, they may go at it again, just where they were before. So it's too early to draw any conclusions as to whether there is a new equation in the region or not.
So what motivates Iran to do this, to bomb, or what motivates Iran to respond to things that aren't done directly to them? I mean, this is kind of challenging for a realpolitik analysis, right? I mean, is this more moral than we're used to?
I mean, look, the Iranians will definitely try to say that there's a moral element to it, and I think there is. I don't think it's the driving force, though. I think part of this is their old view that they need to have this extended forward defense in order to make sure that the war does not come to their own territory is now being revived. They need a strong Lebanon that checks Israel so that Israel does not attack Iran itself. This is self-serving at the end of the day. To do that, of course, they need to make sure that the population in Lebanon, or particularly the Shia population, does not feel that they're being abandoned by the Iranians. This is a sentiment that was widespread in 2004. The Iranians want to be very careful to make sure that they don't strike a deal with the US that leaves some of their supporters or allies thinking that they were abandoned. And then, of course, the very obvious thing, that if the Israelis are allowed to just continue to strike Lebanon and escalate, that means that Israel is free to start a war again. And if there's supposed to be an enduring end to this war, then you cannot have this massive loophole that allows Israel to restart the war. So extending the ceasefire to Lebanon and Israel is, a logical step that is necessary from the Iranian perspective. And I tend to think that there's elements on the US side that understands this as well. It's a necessity in order to make sure that the peace is durable and that it doesn't, flare up into a new war just because the Israelis decide to start it.
And I'm just curious, how much do you think that this kind of Shia ideology, and I've talked about this before, but it's funny because when I was younger, the whole Islam was used as a way to vilify people, right? And it was like, oh, these people, they don't respect life. That's why they're okay killing themselves, killing other people. They send their kids off to die. But now I see more and more people. It's not an Islamophobic trope at all, but it's kind of like there are people who will say, people who are actually Shia, and they'll say that this is part, and not in a murderous way, and if anything, in like a sacrifice way. Like, we are willing to fight and to defend ourselves or other people. Do you buy any of that? Do you think that's sincere for some people, for some leaders?
Look, religious motivation is a very powerful force, and it's part of it. I don't think necessarily the state can sell this policy simply just on its own nationalism or nationalism that is more ethnically based. So you use all kinds of different tools in order to be able to sell this. So to the population, to the soldiers. I mean, remember in 2003, American soldiers were going there because apparently freedom in Iraq was so of importance that they wanted to sacrifice their lives for it. So I would be careful not to buy too much into that there is a significant degree of authenticity behind it, but there is without a doubt a significant potency to ideology, whether it's used by the Iranians, by Israelis, or Americans. At the end of the day, what you do have, though, is that all sides tend to, at times, view the other side's willingness to sacrifice as something very murderous and dark, while it at the same time is using the exact same thing and is viewing its soldiers who are willing to sacrifice themselves as heroes. But when the other side do it, then there's something culturally wrong with them.
Right. Yes.
I mean, to give an example, remember how Ukrainians were lionized when they were fighting for their territory. I mean, I think there's a degree of absolute justification for it. They were invaded, they fought back, but they were absolutely lionized to the point in which in Western media, there were pictures of Ukrainian children holding guns. And this was seen as, wow, look, they're fighting for their lives, for their country and for their territory. But whereas if you had a picture of a Middle Eastern kid with a gun in his hands, it certainly would not be lionized. It would be seen as something profoundly culturally wrong with that country.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. No, and it's hard for me to even express this question because I it's so hard to ask it without sounding like I'm generalizing or being what's the word, reducing or essentializing. But it is interesting how if anything, it's almost there's a religious and obviously all religions can be misused and exploited, but it's interesting that you see, I mean, I've heard so many people tell me who are Lebanese and they live there and they're Christian. They're like, I'm not Muslim, I'm not Shia, but Hezbollah protects me. And I just think it's interesting that it's kind of the inverse of what the racist trope about Muslims is, which is that they go around killing a lot of people because of religion. And what we see is that for some, it's actually they go around protecting people. In part, as you said, it's a multiple factors. Yeah.
And of course, you do have plenty of Lebanese as well who blame Hezbollah and think that it is Iran and Lebanon who is stirring this fight. I don't claim to be an expert on it, but I have been at times quite confused and I've had a difficulty to fully understand it. But when you scratch the surface, it seems to, and I want to be careful, I say it seems to be such that there is a belief that, you know what, Lebanon just simply cannot stand up against Israel. So we just have to accept some sort of a subjugation. That subjugation, if it at least leads to some sort of a peace and stability, that's better. Jordan has been subjugated by the Israelis. It doesn't have any defense or any ability really, but, they have peace and stability, and that's better than resisting. And, people can agree or disagree whether that is the right or the wrong belief. But you're also in the same country, we'll have people who say, absolutely not. We're not going to be subjugated by anyone. And as a result, we're going to resist. And I don't think it's a coincidence necessarily that it is the Shias, because they live in the south. They were the ones who were taking the brunt of the Israeli occupation. And the Iranians only got an inroad into Lebanon in 1982 because of the Israeli invasion of Lebanon. Prior to that, the Iranians, under the Islamic Republic in its first 2 years in power, had tried to spread its revolution, had tried to start these organizations in Lebanon, but actually had failed. It's only after Israel invades Lebanon in which a demand emerges, a critical mass of that demand emerges amongst the Shia in southern Lebanon for an outside protector. And the Iranians were more than happy to step in because back then they were very expansionist and were really trying to spread their revolution.
Mm. Yeah. And you mentioned in a recent post, going back to this question of acting on behalf of another country, which is, of course, related to what you were literally just talking about. You wrote, this is the first time in decades that a regional power has the means, capacity, and willingness to put hard power against Israeli military maneuvers or aggression against a third party, end quote. So how would you compare that to, for instance, what Ansar Allah did when they intervened, in a sense, by blockading ships linked to Israel's genocide of Gaza from entering the Bab al-Mandab Strait? How does this kind of compare?
I think there is a difference, and I think many people pointed that out and pointed it to arguing that was the same thing. I think without a doubt what the Yemenis were doing was not insignificant. But when you take a look at what the Yemenis or the Houthis at the time could do in terms of inflicting pain on Israel, it is not comparable to what the Iranians can do, in the sense that the Iranians can shoot 200-300 missiles at a time. They can do so consecutively for several days in a row, and over time, and not long of a time, degrade the Israeli air defense systems, the radar systems, and cause them to run out of interceptors, and then get a very large number of these missiles through. So in the last day of the 12-day war last year, they got more than 50% of their missiles through, even though they shot a much smaller number of those missiles. Whereas what the Houthis have been able to do is to every once in a while shoot 1 or 2 missiles. That is just not at the same level. Now, their blocking of the Strait of Bab el-Mandeb, of course, is the Red Sea is, of course, not insignificant, but it is not this at the same level of if the Iranians really were to put all of their forces behind us. Again, we don't know if that's what they were hinting at, whether they're going to go in that direction, or if they wanted to just slowly but surely kind of test the Israelis and see if they can establish this new equation.
Right. You also, I saw you on another show talk about whether the United States let Iranian missiles through on purpose. What are your thoughts on that? Did they let that happen? And if so, why?
Remind me. I don't think I wrote about that on my Substack.
No. You talked about it on Mario Nawfal's show.
Okay. Was it recently or was it back then? Because if it was recent, then it was a different context. It was whether the United States this time around was actively involved in shooting down the Iranian missiles. Because we saw that the Israelis attacked against Trump's wishes. There may have been some agreement between the two of them in terms of getting the Israelis to respond at a lesser level than they otherwise would have done, and to only do it in 1 round. But there's also another element, which is at first the US side said that they were not involved in defending Israel. Later on, they said that they were. I don't know where the truth is, but I would suspect that the degree to which the US side this time around was involved in protecting Israel by shooting down Iranian missiles may have been much less. And the reason I say this is because this is not a binary thing. Either you support or you don't. You could do it at very different levels. During the war itself, the United States expended more interceptors defending Israel than Israel did in defending Israel. So the US was extremely active in defending the Israelis. And that gives the US some bandwidth of potentially reducing that in order to send a signal to the Israelis that it is very unhappy that the Israelis are not going along with what the US wanted them to do. And again, speculation on my end, my point is that I don't think it is either or, that suddenly, the US is all in or suddenly the US is all out. There's degrees in between that. And I think that's where you will find the answer.
And what about this famous Trump getting really mad and cursing at Netanyahu that, Axios wrote about? What are your thoughts on this? I mean, is there any change that we're seeing? Is this all political theater?
Look, there is undoubtedly a lot of political theater, but I think also there's a reality in which there is a tremendous amount of tensions between Israel and the United States right now. I think Trump actually does want to get a deal. He needs a deal. He needs to get out of this situation. He's not seeking a deal because he's a good guy or anything like that. He needs to get out of this situation. Now, he may have criteria for how to get out of this deal that I think may be too harsh or too maximalist or too unrealistic. But I do think that he needs to get out of this deal and that he recognized that as well. Netanyahu doesn't want to end the situation. He actually wants to escalate the situation. And if there is a deal, just as the Israelis did against Obama, there's going to be a lot of tensions. Now, I think that Netanyahu himself may have to take more of a back seat in such a fight. But behind the scenes, I think the Israelis will do everything they can to sabotage the deal. I don't think it is a coincidence that it is at this moment that you have a massive spike of Israeli spying on US officials. And it just so happens to be those US officials that are making the decisions about the negotiations, about a deal, about the military posturing.
Right. Yeah, that's, I think that maybe if people try to publicize that more to get Trump to be feel humiliated, like, does he really want to be known as someone who lets Israel spy on his guys? I'm just trying to appeal to whatever, it's not going to be a moral argument that persuades this guy. So Trump, for your own sake, don't let them, don't look like such a cuck, because it's really embarrassing. And we, of course, we all know, as we've covered before, that if Trump really wanted to end this, I mean, he could just get on the phone, right? Like Reagan did with Begin in 1982 over Lebanon, which he called a Holocaust.
Yes. So undoubtedly, the US can put a stop to it. It's always been a question of, are you willing to pay the political cost for stopping it? And I think in this specific situation, the Iranians want to see Trump show that he can and that he will. And Trump is trying to show that he can, but he's not going to fully stop it, because from his standpoint, if he fully stops it, he's going to pay a very high political price. And he's only willing to do so if he knows that there is a deal. But if he's uncertain as to whether there is a deal and he expends that political capital and it turns out that it's for nothing, that's not going to be an attractive situation for him. So I think he's trying to signal, look, I can hold them back, but I'm not going to hold them fully back until I know that there's a signature by the Iranian side on that MOU.
But why would they do that given how much they've
exactly
lied to Iran?
And they will be like, well, why should we trust that you will just
right.
because you say so? You bombed us twice in in the midst of negotiations. We have absolutely no reason to trust you whatsoever. So yeah, that mistrust is at this point a critical reason as to why the two sides, despite the fact that they both need a deal, not managed to get to the finishing line.
And when does it become more politically painful for Trump not to stop Israel?
Well, I mean, if there is a deal and the Israelis do everything they can to sabotage it, then at that point it will be very problematic for Trump if he doesn't step in. So I think under those circumstances, I think that he has to. I don't think he feels that he has to at this point. Kate, I got to run right now, but it was really great talking to you.
Thank you. Sorry, I couldn't
Thank you so much.
Myself. Okay. Thanks. Have a great night, Trita. Okay. Well, guys, we have an amazing guest. Everyone gets so excited when he joins the show. Also, where are we on likes? Because I know that you guys aren't all hate watching. Guys, get these likes higher up. We have like almost half, slightly more than half, but I know that half of you aren't hate watching. So we're going to bring onto the show to talk some more about some of these very provocative things that we brought up, including the Iran war and Israel spying on the U.S. government. We are bringing on none other than Ray McGovern, former CIA analyst turned activist. Welcome back to the show, Ray. Hello.
Thanks, Katie. Glad to be with you.
Of course, yes. Yeah. So I think you heard the tail end of that conversation with Trita.
I did.
So maybe we could just pick up where we left off a little bit, which is what are your thoughts about this? Can you tell us more about the spying that we are aware of? I mean, there's much more than we're aware of, but what do we know about the level of spying that Israel is doing on United States government officials?
Well, Katie, I have to confess, I'm shocked, absolutely shocked that the Israelis are spying on us. I mean, heck, we're allies, aren't we?
Right.
Well, that's another story. We're not allies. I could explain that later. I find most interesting the timing of these revelations. DIA and CIA, NSA, they all know the Israelis are spying us, up the kazoo, as we used to say in the Bronx. Why did they reveal this right now during these circumstances? Well, I think for the same reason that people talk to Axios and other places about how angry, how profane Trump is with Netanyahu, how he says, what the hell, what the F are you doing here? And, I saved your ass and, stuff. In other words, there's a real movement, I think, of dissident people who would like to say, hey, look, do we really want to be jerked around by this nation that needs us for its own existence? So that's how I read this. The fact that the spying goes on is no revelation at all. But the fact that it was leaked and, people are trying to say, look, do we really want to be so closely tied to a country like Israel? I mean, if you go back to George Washington's farewell address, for God's sake, he warned very specifically about alliances that don't really serve the interests of the United States, but serve a foreign power. And these were unhealthy, unwise alliances, and we should shun them above everything else that we do abroad. Well, what was that, 250 some odd years ago? I mean, it's really come into bas relief right now. And there was the only thing I agree with when Trump says something is, we see what happens.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and just so people, I didn't set this up very well, so I'll just set it up, which is that on the topic of the spying, NBC News recently reported that the, quote, counterintelligence threat level was raised by the Defense Intelligence Agency in recent weeks after growing concerns that Israeli espionage had become more aggressive than usual sources say, end quote. And then the New York Times also reported on this memo, and Sagar and Jetty of Breaking Points says that his own sources also insist there's a memo with shocking details of spying. So what is the significance of this leak? But also, as someone who worked in the CIA, what does this look like? What do you think the spying consists of?
Well, Katie, I've been around a while, and I joined the CIA in April of 1963 as a specialist on Russia, Soviet Union at the time. I led the Soviet foreign policy branch just about 5 years after I entered on. And I found out that whatever we wrote on Soviet foreign policy, if it mentioned the word Israel or Israeli, it had to be passed, it had to be signed off on by a fellow named James Jesus Angleton.
Right.
He's not part of the analysis division. He was the counterintelligence guy, but more important, he ran the whole relationship with the Israelis. He knew what was going on, and what he chose to tell President Kennedy, who was the president at the time, we'll never know, but there was a big to-do about Israel seeking nuclear weapons. Netanyahu himself participated in stealing the technology and the parts. And so Angleton was his own man, but all I'm trying to say here is that it was bizarre, in my view. As a young, naive guy, I said, well, he's counterintelligence, maybe he's do that. And, he would never, we never got into, well, correct that, when we were talking about Soviet policy toward the Middle East. Sometimes he would intervene and say, no, we don't want to say that. We would say, well, yes, it's true. And whether the director would overrule Angleton or us, well, you can imagine which one he overruled.
Wow. Yeah.
Not us. I mean, us.
Right. Well, Brad backstage, you should put this in chat, Brad, but Brad wrote me, just going to break that fourth wall, which we so frequently break on the show. An important point. Let's see, Brad, is it in the chat yet or no?
I don't think that I can fit all that in the chat,
Okay.
Katie.
You want to ask your question?
Hey, Brad.
Well, hey, Ray. Thanks so much for being here. And please correct me if I'm mistaken, but I believe the Israeli malware Pegasus, I believe it's called, which my understanding is one of the biggest threats of that is that it's able to infiltrate devices and control devices and you're able to do that without having to have physical access to the device to put it on there. That some of the concern about this spying, involved that spyware. And I was reading about how a lot of these people that were going on these negotiation trips from the Trump administration were not handing in their personal devices and getting like secure travel devices. They were using their personal devices. They were flying on like private airplanes. And it seems to me like all of those things would kind of go against the, protocol for, being as secure as possible. I was just wondering if you had any insights or thoughts on that, or if I'm mistaken in any way.
No, I think you're right. The technology is such these days that they can do pretty much anything they want, offensive as well as defensive cyber warfare. We know that Julian Assange made I won't say the mistake, but he revealed, a whole system of CIA offensive spyware, some of which can make a car go 100 miles an hour without you knowing about it. I think I know one person who was murdered in that way. Would allow you to use a TV that isn't even turned on, to listen to everything that goes on in your bedroom, all that kinds of stuff. So yeah, the state of the art is incredible, and with the Israelis bound to us at the hip, They probably have all that technology, and they don't need to steal it.
Well, right, and that particular spyware, I believe, did originate in Israel, and again, unless I'm mistaken, because of how incredibly powerful, that was. I believe the Biden administration basically banned it, and then this most recent Trump administration reversed that. But also, then it just seems to me crazy that it seems to me that the people in the Pentagon or wherever that are raising these threat levels, but then you have the White House, the administration coming out saying, no, that's not true, that's not happening. Like that,
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's policy in Congress, I believe, that is at least trying to kind of even further enmesh the Israeli military and the United States military. Like it just seems like a lot of these things seem to be at odds with one another,
Yeah, that's why I think the leak was deliberate, and it was done by people who want to put the brakes on this thing. People who may have read Washington's farewell address, for God's sake. It's clear as a bell where our interests lie. But, bands, schmams, whatever, Witkoff, he's got his own plane, his own phone. Kushner, somebody's going to say, hey, Jared, for God's sake, don't use that phone. Use this one.
Right.
I'm never going to do that. So not only the Israelis, but the Russians, everybody else has fair game to what's going on. As I say, I'm not surprised, not shocked. What's interesting is that it was leaked, and it was leaked at a time when other things are being leaked. Like, what are you? What are you?
Right. It's the Netanyahu call or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Right. It's not surprising. The noteworthiness is not the spying. The noteworthiness is the leak of it, right?
Yeah, that's the timing, especially. Yeah. Now, whether I have any, it's Rubio who's running what's going on together with Hegseth. And one has to remember that Rubio uniquely, since Kissinger, controls the flow of information into the president, intelligence or anything else. So if he doesn't want the president to know something, the CIA analysts are prepared. It's like an anal sphincter. Okay, it's all up sometimes. It's constipated, and the great constipator is. Sorry for the graphic allusion, but I don't want to call him a Arschloch, which is what the Germans.
I mean, likening Rubio to a sphincter, that does seem appropriate. Yeah.
So anyhow, so there is this anal sphincter, and Rubio is in control of that. So, when Rubio explained why we attacked Iran on the 28th of February, I was shocked. It was the 2nd of February, March, 3 days later, okay? And he said, look, the Israelis told us that they were going to attack Iran. And, we were afraid that the Iranians would retaliate against us. And so we decided we needed to preempt that. So we needed to attack them so that our losses wouldn't be so great. Hello. So translation, Israel made us do it.
Right.
It's not quite that simple, but it's almost that simple. I mean, I'm sure it was planned together, but even for Rubio to think that was a logical explanation. Of course, Joe Kent came right in 2 weeks later and said, look, Mr. President, with all due respect, I resign. And I resigned because there was no imminent threat and because this whole thing was made up in Tel Aviv and by Israel's supporters in Washington, period. Whoa! Number 2 guy in the national intelligence setup. Not only saying he quit, why he quit, and this very kernel of information, which no one ever says, that it was Israel that did this, that speaks well for Joe. And 2 weeks later, he said, look, you want me to explain some more? Okay, here it is. You're not going to have any agreement at all unless you cut off aid for Israel. Okay, you understand that now? If you cut off aid for Israel, you have a chance. Well, we haven't done that, have we? So it's very clear. And I go back a ways, and there's all kinds of indications that I got as a mostly Soviet and European analyst, but China as well, and then the Middle East to the degree the Soviets got involved there. But there were several times when I'll give you, in the Bronx we say, I'll give you a for instance.
Yeah.
You want a for instance?
I gotta have my mom on to translate as a Bronxian. Bronxian.
Okay, so here I am. It's 1974, right? Pretty young, but I'm acting National Intelligence Officer for Western Europe. Okay, my boss, he's testifying before the Church Committee.
Wow.
So here
and for people who don't know what the Church Committee is, it's how would you put it in one? It's like basically where they exposed just the tip of the iceberg in terms of America's crimes.
Yeah, the family jewels of the CIA, all kinds of drugs and assassinations and using journalists. The whole schmear came out. Right. And my boss, who was very high level, Keith Clark was his name. He was up there almost every day trying to explain what happened and try to tamp down the damage. So here I am, and there's a war. What happens? Turkey invades Cyprus. My God. And what do? They use U.S. weapons to do that. And what's wrong with that? There's a law against that. And what else is wrong? There's a Greek lobby in Congress. So the Greek lobby says, no more arms for Turkey. Embargo. Now, Kissinger, who's working with Nixon, of course, he's up in arms. He said, oh, no, you can't do that. Turkey's so important. It's the anchor for NATO and all that stuff. So he's really going crazy. So I attend this meeting at the State Department. We're trying to plot out what to do. I'm not giving any advice on policy, but I am on intelligence. So they're all saying, oh, my God, we've got to make sure that the Greeks relent and let us give arms to the Turks. We can't tolerate this embargo. And I said, not totally in a naive way, I said, hey, maybe there's a silver lining here. Yeah, maybe the Israelis will think twice about attacking some other country with our weapons if the embargo is real and it goes on for a while. What? Everybody in the room was looking at me like I was from Mars. I can't even think of that. Embargo on arms to Israel. So there you go. That was 1974. So I had all these kind of glimmers into what a hold Israel has in them.
We're 50 years later.
What's that?
We're 50 years later.
Yeah. So yeah, that's right.
And still.
Yeah. And of course, they got away with the USS Liberty.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that at the end of the show. We're going to save that for the end of the show for reasons I'll get into.
And I'll excuse myself, but Ray, thank you so much for taking my question.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're most welcome, Brad.
Yeah.
I can give you another vignette, more recent. I used to live up in Arlington, Virginia, when I was working at the CIA. Actually, except when I was overseas, I was there for 55 years. I slithered out of the swamp. We're down in the South now. Anyhow, and by
the way, I just want to please keep this anecdote in mind. Okay. Don't forget what it is. Give me a keyword or something. But because we're talking about your departure from this world, I was kind of remiss. I forget that not everyone knows your bio. So not only were you are you a former CIA analyst turned activist, but you headed the CIA branch analyzing Russian foreign policy in the 70s. And from 1981 to 1985, you presented in person the early morning briefings of the president's daily brief. But then you said in 2006, you were awarded the Intelligence Commendation Medallion at retirement. And in an act of conscience in early 2006, you returned the medallion explaining, quote, I do not want to be associated, however remotely, with an agency engaged in torture. And in 2003, in January, 2 months before the U.S. attacked Iraq, you co-founded Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity to warn the presidents that the intelligence on Iraq was fraudulent. And that's called VIPs or VIPs. Okay, so back to your slithering.
Slithering. Well, we slithered out of the swamp of Washington 7 years ago down here with some of our grandchildren. Good move, by the way. But before we did that, I used to meet with high muckety mucks whenever I could find them and challenge them if the cameras were on. This one particular time, I was at the Arlington Symphony. It was a good symphony. And at the intermission, I used to call it halftime, but it's properly called intermission. We're walking. Oh, I see John Warner. Now, for those of you who don't know who John was, very distinguished Virginia gentleman, long white mane, and he'd been senator for like 30 years, and he was head of the Senate Armed Services Committee, and he's walking all alone out there. So I said, Rita, please, go get a drink out there. I said, Senator Warner, Ray McGovern. And, now in Washington, the ethos is such that if somebody looks decent, and I did then, and was, you should remember his name. Well, you never say, huh? You say, right. Oh, Ray? I said, right. Yeah. When we were at the Bolshoi Ballet in Moscow for the signing of the SALT agreements. You remember you came late because you were working on the Law of the Sea treaty, and somebody asked me to give you my seat, and so I did. Oh, sure, Ray. So he puts his arm here under my. He says, "Now, what's on your mind, Ray?" I said, "Well, I'm glad you asked, Senator, because I see a lot of indications that Israel is about to attack Iran and draw us in. Well, this friendly little arm embrace becomes like a vice, and the blood stops flowing into my arm." And he said, "What'd you say?" "I think Israel's going to attack Iran, and we're going to be in trouble."
And what year was this?
Charlie, how are you? End of embrace. Charlie, he didn't even know it was Charlie, but right. It was, so here was a physical pain that I had suffered here from the most distinguished guy with all kinds of power, who let Rumsfeld cover up the torture that went on in Abu Ghraib. And so, it's Congress, it's the State Department. This deep state has a real problem, and part of it is Israel, of course. And Israel's kind of like the 51st state without, without being the 51st state. So that's the problem. It's always been that way. I just thought you'd like that vignette because I still remember it. It hurt.
And when was this? More or less?
This would have been about, about 80, 85, 86.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Right. Things, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Wow.
But let me correct something you said there. But my bio was good, and I really like the fact that you told people that I briefed the President's Daily Brief one-on-one for 4 years during the first Reagan administration. But you also said that before I depart this scene, now I don't intend to depart the scene anytime soon. I feel pretty good, actually.
Yeah, good.
So if I depart the scene abruptly, please look into it.
Okay, yes. And you're not feeling, glum or anything. Okay, good to know.
I make a joke.
Oh, yeah. But were you going to say something about, oh, no, you were just, okay. Well, did you have another anecdote you were about to share?
Well, let's see.
I have many more questions. I thought I was interrupting you.
No, I think that's probably good enough for anecdotes. I tend to talk a lot, so please ask your questions, and I'll try to restrain myself.
Okay, no, but I love those stories. Since people like to say, I'm going to ask you more about. I'm going to return to Iran for a little bit. And people like to say, Trump likes to say, or when he can remember the talking point, or the mainstream media likes to say, that Iran started this conflict in 1979 with the Islamic Revolution. And so as a CIA for many years, starting in 63, you started, right?
63, right.
Yeah. can you describe the ways the CIA was interfering in Iran before 1979, including the infamous coup against Mossadegh in 53? But what other kinds of interference should people know about that's not perhaps as well known?
Well, I think the 53 was the first real big regime change, and is worth a couple of sentences here. I know people, I served with people who were involved in that, okay? Kermit Roosevelt, the grandson of Teddy, was leading the pack, but some operatives lived long enough to have served with me. And the Project AJAX was what it was called, Operation AJAX. And, they had doubts about whether it was a smart thing to do as they became educated, as I became educated. Suffice it to say that when I let myself be recruited, I took the initiative. This is 1960, 61. The CIA was a young fledgling organization that was described to me as a place where you could get all the access you might to information, put it together and report it directly to the president without having to bow to the State Department or Defense Department. And guess what, Katie? That was true. It was true on Soviet foreign policy. It wasn't quite true on Latin America or other issues, but on the Soviet thing, they took that seriously, and I could report without fear or favor what I thought. So it was a good place to work. But they also told me in this book they gave me to read that Iran was about to go communist, right? And the Russians were really going to take over Iran. And so the operations part of our agency did a great thing, and they overthrew that commie-leaning government there. And so, naive guy out of graduate school, didn't pay much attention to that because that was on the operations side. And never the two will meet. They're two separate CIAs, really. So what I learned was that it was the British that were our patrons in our they taught us how to do this intelligence business. And when Mossadegh, the only freely elected prime minister of Iran for 3 millennia, okay, when he was elected, and then he said, my God, a lot of people are really poor here. The Brits are taking 90% of the revenue from the oil under our soil. So maybe we ought to think about nationalizing that. Then the Brits took us by the arm and said, now, CIA guys, Kermit, this is what you do when an upstart third worlder thinks that the oil underneath his soil there belongs to him and not BP or its predecessors. So they took us by the hand, and so your point is really excellent. 1953 is the benchmark. That's when we overthrew the duly elected president. Mossadegh was his name, and we put in a guy who had a secret service worse than the Gestapo, the Shah of Iran. Okay. Now, he'd do whatever we wanted. We'd give him all kinds of weaponry and so forth. But he was our guy, and he was brutal. And so when you think of Khomeini coming in back in 79 or so, that was a reaction to the brutality of this guy who finally got cancer, right? And so he decides he wants the best treatment, and he asks the U.S., can he come to the U.S.? And Jimmy Carter, I guess, at the time says, well, nice thing to do. Yeah, maybe then you go away. But that was it for the Iranians, because the Iranians knew what was going on in the U.S. embassy. And so, oh my God, they're going to either fix this guy or pick somebody else to come in here. And so they looted the embassy and took hostages. Now, I wasn't in favor of them taking hostages, but I understand exactly why they did and why they took all the paper from the basement that couldn't be shredded to show that, how Iran was so subservient to the United States. So Iranian relations with the United States goes back to 1953, okay, not 1979. And one little vignette about Khomeini, a lot of revolutions are enabled by new technology, okay? Now, I know a lot about new technology, which you younger guys say, well, take it as a matter of course. But back in 1979, there was something called there were two reels, right? Yeah, I know what it's called. It was called a tape recorder, okay? And Khomeini made these fiery speeches, and they recorded it, okay? And then they put it in these little cassettes, and then they brought them to, and then from every minaret, Khomeini speaking. So they were ripe for this, and I was surprised at how long it took the Shah to finally succumb. So that's where it all started, and people don't forget that. And I'm only talking about people's fathers and people's grandfathers and people of my age who remember exactly how all that happened and how Iran's unique chance after 3 millennia to have a representative government and be able to profit from the riches within its own country was flawed, was spurned, thwarted by the Anglo-American Entente here, which flaunted its ability to do such things. And so I learned in the process a lot of things, partly by talking to people who were involved. And so maybe there's some advantage to having been around a while.
Well, speaking of having been around a while, you obviously, your beat was Russia. What is your analysis of the latest in the Russia in what we can call the Ukraine proxy war? You know, we hear a lot of people saying that the Russians are losing, that Ukraine is winning. In fact, I want to get your reaction to a video of Democratic Congressman from Connecticut, Jim Hines. He had some interesting things to say over the weekend to Margaret Brennan on Face the Nation.
I reached out to you wanting to also speak to you about Ukraine before this controversy erupted here with Bill Pulte. You were just there. You were meeting with President Zelenskyy. Just in the past few days, Ukraine has carried out some very deep strikes. St. Petersburg, 600 miles into Russian territory. How do you judge where the war is at this moment in time? Is Russia still winning?
No, Russia is not winning, and I mean that's the headline, right? Ukraine is now winning by any standard, right? On a net basis, you know, the front lines are moving a couple of square miles here or there, but on a net basis, the Ukrainians are now retaking territory. The Ukrainians are inflicting a mind-boggling number of deaths on the Russians. You know, for every square mile that the Russians move, they're giving 250, 300 Russian men in fatalities. You know, the Russian casualties are like 30,000 a month. It's just staggering. I mean, it's like a Vietnam every 2 months for the Russians there. And as you pointed out, the Ukrainians are now striking deep into Russian territory in a way that has compromised, you know, 30% or so of the Russian refining capacity. So make no mistake, the Ukrainians are winning this war.
Okay, so make no mistake, the Ukrainians are winning this war. What say ye?
Bollocks is what the British say. I won't use appropriate adjectives. Jim Hines, I remember seeing him appearing at Hillary Clinton's old think tank, so to speak, saying the Russians hacked to help Hillary win. And Hines is going to say,
to help Hillary lose, right? To help Hillary lose.
Yeah, well, that was the whole idea. Yeah, the Russians hacked because they wanted Trump to be in there, and of course, not everybody knows, but that was completely wrong. And we have CIA people coming out of the woodwork now, trying to get the intelligence committees in the Congress to face up to the fact that John Brennan and the others imagined all this business stuff, and that impeded what Trump wanted to do. All he wanted to do was create a positive, you know, a decent relationship with Russia. He was stymied in doing that. Anyhow. So Himes is not to be believed. Now on the woodwork here, what's going on? Russians are winning. I mean, I don't know how everyone is going to rationalize about a couple of months from now when the Russians will have defeated the 3 remaining towns in Donetsk. Okay, and that will mean they've been taking the whole of Donbass. and there are a couple of other provinces that they claim they'll be getting those as well. Now, the Ukrainians have had some success with their drone warfare to make it more difficult for the Russians, but the trend is inexorable, okay? And the Ukrainians can't possibly win this war. I mean, the foolhardiness with which people went into this war, people who apparently never looked at a map and never saw the disparity between Russian potential and the rest of and Ukraine, it doesn't make any sense. So the problem is that the American people don't know this. The American people focus on what are they told? Oh, they're told that this was a unprovoked attack on Ukraine, and that it was a full-scale military attack. And oh, yeah, the other one is illegal. Usually they say unprovoked and full scale. Well, we can talk about full scale. It wasn't full scale. It was less than 90,000 men. Okay. And besides, they agreed to stop the war after 6 weeks, for God's sake. And the French and the British deceived the Russians into thinking that they should pull their 90,000 people back, which they did. And it's right on the record. I mean, and even the Chancellor of West Germany, Chancellor of Germany, Angela Merkel, and Hollande from France, both admitted on the record openly, oh yeah, well, when we said that we should have a ceasefire, and when we said that just hang on there, we was buying 7 years for U.S. and NATO to build up Ukrainian forces with NATO training, with NATO weaponry. And look at them now, they're bragging about deceiving Putin. So the real thing here is to attack, to persuade the American people they've been had again, okay? In other words, it wasn't unprovoked. Now, John Mearsheimer, one of my heroes, professor at the University of Chicago, 12 years ago.
Friend of show. Yeah.
Yeah. 12 years ago, I think I have. Yeah, here it is. I was doing a show on Ukraine just earlier this afternoon, and here's his. Can you see that title?
Why the Ukraine crisis is the West's fault. Wow,
Yeah.
the liberal delusions that provoked Russia. No, the liberal delusions that provoked Putin. Wow. I thought you were going to show me the copy of his book, The Lobby, but yeah, this is, okay, here we go.
So this is Foreign Affairs, the most prestigious in those days Foreign Affairs journal. And it's 12 years ago, right? And I mean, if you listen to Mearsheimer, you read this saying, well, that it has to be right. I mean, it's the realist school of international relations. Now, I was a Russian major. I took a lot of foreign policy courses, but I didn't know that there was a realist school of international relations. What I did was realist school as an analyst in the Army and then the CIA. I didn't know there was anything else. Okay, So anyhow, here's what he said. I took out one sentence or two sentences from what this really says. Mind you, September 2014. To place it in perspective, the coup in Kiev, blatant coup, advertised 2.5 weeks before on YouTube with an intercepted conversation between Victoria Nuland and U.S. Ambassador in Kiev, Jeffrey Pyatt. So this is in September. He probably wrote it in July or August. That's what he says. The NATO and the U.S. now face a choice on Ukraine. They can exacerbate hostilities with Russia, which will end up devastating Ukraine, or they can work to create a prosperous but neutral Ukraine. Okay, 12 years ago. Now, what did he say in May of 2013? 23, when I asked him at a public forum, what do you say now? Well, he said, this whole thing about unprovoked, let me just tell you in a nutshell. Quote, Putin invaded Ukraine with great reluctance. I do not think he had any other options. I do not think he had any other options. I believe that to be true. He was deeply committed to the Minsk agreement so that he would not have to invade Ukraine. And every time Putin speaks lately, he refers to the Minsk agreement. And he says, you can't deal with these people. They trick you. I was taken to the cleaners. Putin says this. I was naive, okay? I'm not going to be naive anymore, okay? So here's Mearsheimer kind of admitting that, not admitting, but saying, look, it was not unprovoked. Right. And if more were needed, you have the Secretary General of NATO, Jens Stoltenberg from Norway, saying 3 years ago, July of 2023, before the EU Parliament, I quote, the Russians offered us a treaty. They wanted no Ukraine in NATO. They said that they would invade Ukraine if we let Ukraine in NATO. And so we said, no. They were against NATO expansion, but guess what? We got a twofer. We got Finland and we got Sweden. So they didn't like expansion. So we got 2 extra ones. Meanwhile, 500,000 Ukrainian youth had been killed, for God's sake, Katie. I mean, this kind of leadership you got in NATO, bragging about this stuff. And his successor, Rutte, is, well, I would say even worse, on a par with Stoltenberg. In other words, Russia said, we will have to invade Ukraine if you do this. And they said that back in 2008 to the U.S. ambassador in Moscow. It was Lavrov, the foreign minister, to a fellow named Bill Burns, actually. Right. And Bill Burns later became CIA, but Bill Burns reported dutifully and correctly.
Niet means niet, right?
Niet, you got it. Yeah, niet means yet. This is the red line for Russia on Ukraine. If you try to get Ukraine in NATO, they have openly threatened that there would be civil war and they would have to intervene. His words, Burns, I guess he forgot all that stuff when he was CIA director. Anyhow, so it's, if you look at the historical record, and kind of that's what I do, you see how this thing can be explained and how it can be distorted by the likes of Jim Hines, who, is no more than a Democratic, a Democrat or whatever they call him, spokesperson.
Right. Yeah. A hack.
That's the word. Yeah.
Yeah. Not to put too fine a point on it. We also have, and I mean, it's so disgusting to watch these people kind of emote over how many dead Russians there are. They're happy to talk about dead Russians. I mean, that's already sociopathic, the way they celebrate that, as if that's a good thing. But they always omit the dead Ukrainians. That's not part of their analysis, because they pretend that they care about Ukrainians. And of course, if they did, they wouldn't have, blocked diplomacy like they did through Boris Johnson. You, of course, talk about this frequently. And it is very depressing to watch the media totally cover this up. I mean, it's so relevant, and they never talk about it. They don't talk about these brutal videos of Ukrainian men being kidnapped, fighting. I mean, they're really heart-wrenching. They're really disturbing to watch. And as they're being dragged into vans because they don't want to fight, they don't want to serve as cannon fodder. But something else that I thought was interesting, and I know that you commented on this briefly, is this letter that that Zelenskyy wrote to Putin, and I wanted to quote from part of it. So just to set up the context, 1 second, please. Where's this? So there's an open letter to the president of the Russian Federation from the president of Ukraine. This is from June 4th. Let me just do a screen share. Apologies, because I hadn't planned on this, but now I realize it's a pretty important thing to talk about. Okay. So let's see which part. When you came to power in Russia more than 26 years ago, many people in Ukraine viewed you positively. That is how it was, but that is now in the past. Now the overwhelming majority of Ukrainians view it positively that our long-range drones paid a visit to the opening of your forum in St. Petersburg, covering a distance of more than 1,000 kilometers. As you know very well, that distance is not the limit of our capabilities. For 26 years, your time in power has completely changed the agenda of relations between Ukraine and Russia. From discussions about trade and other civilian matters, our nations have moved to talking almost exclusively about strikes and losses. You have spent nearly half of your 26 years in power in Russia waging war against Ukraine. Whatever you may say about NATO, geopolitics, or the Russian language, this war is your personal choice, a war without a real cause. This is how history will remember it. Those years could have been very different. I mean, there's more, obviously, that stood out for me, but if there's anything else that you want to make sure that we cover in this letter, let me know. But what are your thoughts on this?
Well, this was ostensibly to set up talks. I'd like to come meet you, and we'll figure this all out together. So it's a terribly insulting letter. On that same day, after the letter had just been received, Putin was asked about this at a Q&A he gave to reporters from all over the world, and he said, Peskov tried to show me that letter. I said, I don't want to read that. So he tried twice, and I didn't want to read it. Well, the next day he had read it, and he talked about, this letter is not designed to set up talks or a decent relationship. It's designed to insult me and insult the whole process. I mean, this is the last thing that one would write if one was serious about negotiating an end to this war. So I think the British probably wrote the letter. It was very clever, very awful stuff. But, it was not serious, and neither is Zelenskyy. And the big thing, of course, is Zelenskyy is not the legal representative of the Kiev government. He was supposed to be elections 2 years ago. Now he's still president, but he hasn't been elected. So Putin gave several paragraphs on that on Thursday, the day before, saying, look, we don't know if there's got to be elections. Is he going to run again? And he's already two years, and they only 8 years. And so how are we going to, we'll let the lawyers decide this. But meanwhile, we're not going to talk with him. We'll talk with other people who are more serious, but not with him. So, yeah, the thing is, now for him to threaten, to him to say, oh, so we sent some sanctions. We sent some drones into St. Petersburg, just as you open this great big economic summit. We could do that again. Well, people really worried about that. Not so Putin. It hardly came up at all during the Petersburg celebration or Petersburg summit, the Petersburg economic meetings. What really reigns here is the fact that, drones have put in a real complicated mechanism here, but the ones that fly into Russia, most of them are shot down because Russia has air defense. Now, when Russia fires drones into Ukrainian, most of them get through because Ukraine has almost no air defense. So the Russians are not only moving slowly on the ground, but they're also improving their air defense, and they are obliterating, pardon the word, all the places in Ukraine where these drones are fired from, okay? Now, one interesting wrinkle, people are worried about Russia attacking a NATO country. Now, Latvia was reported to be welcoming 5 bases in Latvia for use by the Ukrainians to fire drones deep into Russia. Okay, if you look at the map, you see why. Okay, so the Russian CIA, the SVR. Okay, I learned they have a press office, and they made a statement 2.5 weeks ago, and I said, look, the Latvians say that they might give the Ukrainians use of these 5 bases, and lists the names of the bases to fire drones here, and they have persuaded the Latvians that if these things are fired from Latvia, no one will ever know where they were fired from. So the SVR says, now, this is a combination of extreme Russophobia and an inability to think cogently. But that's what the Latvians have been persuaded to do. Well, what we have to tell you is this, that we know the coordinates of each one of those bases. We also know the coordinates of the decision-making centers in Riga, in Latvia. And this is the key sentence, membership in NATO will be no protection from retaliation if you do this. Whoa. Now, that got a lot of people worried, and it got my attention as well, because the question would be, would Russia attack a NATO country? Okay. Well, suffice it to say, I don't think the Latvians are going to, I think they're going to check around and say whether the Russians are right, that they will know where these things are fired from. I don't think the Latvians are going to try it. Now, if they try it, then we have a real dilemma for Putin. You know, what does he do? Will he automatically strike out against a NATO country? I say no. There are lots of ways to get back at the people in the government in Latvia, okay? And why do I say that? Because I've seen discussions in high-level policy-making circles in the United States. I watched what I think happened in the Kremlin for a long time. So here's the Kremlin, here's Putin. He says, okay, now, if we strike Riga or we strike Latvia, what percent of the, what do you think Trump would, what percentage would you give Trump for reacting by invoking Article 5 of the NATO treaty? And what, 10%? No, wait, 20%. Do I have, 15%. That's too high. Too high? What do you mean? Too high. Look what we've built up for the last 25 years in Russia. I mean, it's not worth it. The risk-benefit calculation, we're winning in Ukraine. We just have to keep our heads. If the Latvians do something stupid, we'll take care of the Latvians, but we don't have to attack another NATO country just now. It may come to that, and we may have to say, well, it probably is the case that Trump will not invoke Article 5 and end the world. But I take the, even if it's just 10%, as you said, forget about it. We don't need to do that. This is my impression of Putin. And I have to say, that having watched every leader since Khrushchev right after Stalin, he's unique in his savvy, cool-headedness, cool hand Luke, I'd call him. He's so perspicacious and so confident. And he exuded confidence during those big meetings there in Petersburg, that I'm confident that he'll keep a lid on these people who are saying, oh, let's not only strike Europe, but also use maybe mini nukes to the. He's not crazy, and he rein these people in, and he finds some advantage to letting them rant and rave, like this guy Karaganov, who wants to use nukes right away. So it's good for these people to bloviate. Whether Putin would ever allow this, I hope I'm right on this, but my diagnosis is that he won't be provoked, and he knows exactly that's what the Europeans are trying to do. And as long as he keeps winning in Ukraine, and I do expect it to pretty much end on the land this year. Now, that means that the Russians, I think, will be able to combat the use of drones that the Ukrainians have used with some success. But I think there are only 3 cities left between the Russian-controlled territory in Ukraine and the Dnieper River. And the whole of Donbass is probably going to be taken by the end of the year, and perhaps Kherson, Zaporozhye as well.
Well, I wanted to shift gears and ask you about the sad anniversary of the USS Liberty attack. But first, I want to ask you before that, since you used to give the president briefings every morning, what would be in your briefing if you were going to brief the President Trump today? What would you advise him?
Okay, it wasn't every morning. We put it out 6 days a week. It was every other morning, so that we could recuperate and read in and all that kind of stuff. What would I tell President Trump? Wow, I would have to be very cautious and candid at the same time. If Rubio was there, I would have to be extra cautious, but I would say, Mr. Trump, we mentioned to you that Iran had the ability to close the Strait of Hormuz, and that they probably would if you joined Israel in attacking Iran. That is their nuclear weapon. We still judge, Mr. Trump, Mr. President, that Iran is not working on a real, like, nuclear weapon. There is no evidence. The IAEA, UN body, the inspectors, they have never found any evidence. And actually, going back to 2007, a national intelligence estimate, which, as you know, Mr. President, is the highest genre of intelligence analysis, concluded unanimously with high confidence all 16 intelligence agencies at the time, and they said Iran stopped working on a nuclear weapon at the end of 2003 and has not resumed work on the nuclear weapon. And we have looked real hard at these things, and every year since we've reiterated that until just this year when Tulsi Gabbard, our boss, didn't pronounce on that in the threat assessment, right? She didn't categorize the threat, even though a senator pinned her down and said, look, this is the annual threat assessment. Was this an immediate, was this an imminent threat? And she said, well, only the president can say whether so. So, you know, Mr. President, we don't think the Iranians are working on a nuclear weapon. So you have that that ability to reason from that. For example, if it comes down to whether you would like to advertise the fact that you have prevented Iran from working on a nuclear weapon, most Americans don't know. Most Americans think they are. So that would be an advantage for you if you wanted to say you had stopped. You got a written promise from the Iranians, and they probably, I mean, this would be easier for them to do. It's not only that they don't feel they need it when they have Hormuz, it's also there's a religious fatwa against it.
Right.
We say, oh, you know, that sounds like an encyclical or something for the Catholics. No. Encyclicals are, you know, you can take them or leave them, right? Fatwas you can't, okay?
Right.
And when you say fatwas, that means that it has to be, if it's going to be reversed, now, is the son going to reverse the father's fatwa? I don't know. But if it were to be reversed, my Iranian colleagues tell me this would have to be debated, would have to be approved by the Supreme Council or whatever they call it. So we would know about it. They don't need to do that. And if they did do that, well, that would belie their beliefs in weapons of mass destruction. And lastly, Mr. President, you should know that when we helped Iraq attack Iran in 1981, and that war went on for 8-9 years, we actually gave the precursor chemicals to Saddam Hussein, and he used them. And many of the Iranian leaders now are people who were suffered casualties, including chemical weapons casualties. That war ended, and they remember that. And the point I'm trying to make, Mr. President, is that even though they had the capability to retaliate in kind, these fatwas mean something special to them. They did not. They did not counter by using chemical or biological weapons, and they don't have a nuclear weapon. So in our view, we don't understand it as well as Westerners, but there's something in Islam, at least in Shia Islam, that says, no, this is really haram. This is really beyond the pale. We're not going to do that. And so we'll watch it closely, Mr. President, but that's the situation on the nuclear thing. And if you want to do the enrichment and get it down to beyond, well down before it's 60%, the Russians keep saying they're willing to help on that. Now, have they helped before? Oh, actually, yeah, 12 years ago, 11 years ago, with the JCPOA, okay, that you left, they did take 90% of the enriched uranium. So they're willing to do that again. So you got a way out of this, Mr. President, if you choose to take it. That's the intelligence. Of course, it's up to Mr. Rubio and Mr. Hegseth, all my distinguished friends, to make these decisions.
Right. Well, we're going to have to clip that and send that to the president in case he's not watching live. So now I'm going to ask you, that was great. And you very clever way to appeal to his, to what makes him tick. Before I shift gears to this really disturbing story about the USS Liberty, I'm going to need people to like this stream because I know you're loving it. And we're almost at 1,000 viewers in real time. We really got, if you haven't liked it already, please do like it. I'm training our viewers. When we got hacked, we're now facing some algorithmic suppression because of these hackers. So do your part and like the stream and tweet it out and share it on social media because we want to make sure as many people come as possible. So Ray, you've been so generous with your time. So I will just subject you to one more subject, if that's okay, which is the USS Liberty. And this is in some exciting news. I mean, if you can call it exciting, because it's so disturbing and sad. But Thomas Massie, the Republican congressman who was recently defeated from Kentucky, he recently lost his Republican primary reelection bid to a Trump-backed candidate, Ed Gilrain, in the most expensive congressional primary election in history, in large part thanks to APAC and other pro-Israel donors. So on Monday, he had something very interesting to say on the anniversary of the attack against the USS Liberty in international waters by Israel in 1967. So here, let's hear what he had to say.
8th, they started the day. The visibility was unlimited. The American flag was flying proudly on the USS Liberty. More planes came from Israel to surveil the boat, the ship. And they thought they were in good shape. But what happened next surprised them all. French Mirage jets showed up and for 25 minutes strafed and attacked the USS Liberty. They shot rockets. They shot 30-millimeter cannons into the hull and into the ship. They even dropped napalm on the bridge of the ship. This was an effort to kill everybody on board. There was no intention of taking prisoners. After the 25 grueling minutes of attack on this virtually unarmed ship, and they thought things were over and they could recover, the torpedo boats showed up, 3 torpedo boats. They launched 4 torpedoes. One of them hit the hull of the USS Liberty and killed 25 people instantly. It blew a 40-foot by 40-foot hole in the side of this ship. They were intent on sinking it. But they were also intent on not having a single survivor. According to eyewitness accounts, the Israelis machine gunned the lifeboats that they put down. They machine gunned the firefighters who were on the deck. They were bringing the wounded and the dead to the mess hall to triage them. They had one doctor who was trying to help them all, put a few stitches in. It was harrowing, and it's amazing. If not for that crew, that boat would have sunk that day. But it still wasn't over. Helicopters showed up, combat helicopters. And the USS Liberty, even though their signals were being jammed by the Israelis, got a signal out. And there were ships that tried to respond. The USS Saratoga, the USS America sent planes. Both of them sent planes to help the USS Liberty. And something happened that's never happened before. A ship under attack, the planes were recalled. This has never happened before. And they sat there for 17 hours. 34 dead, 174 wounded, out of 294 crew members. That's over 70% casualty rate, unheard of. The Israelis were intent on leaving no survivor. And what about our own military? Why did they not send anybody for 17 hours to help these men? So what really happened?
So, wanted to show people, because you obviously, Ray, you know about this, but I think it's really important because it's so covered up, and I'm going to ask you about this cover up, but because it's so covered up, I wanted to show people some footage of the USS Liberty attack. And there was a great documentary produced by Al Jazeera. This is from 2014. And in it, in fact, they include audio that they received from the, they include audio from the IOF, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, which we call the IOF, Israeli Occupation Forces, talking about the ship and bombing it. It also shows footage of the ship getting torpedoed. So let's watch some of this footage. If you are watching this live, you are so lucky because you got to hear and see that entire thing. If you're watching this later on and you want to see the full chat, including where we get into a lot of the details about the disgusting cover-up behind the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty, then you can do that at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Again, that's patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. And that is a way that you get to see lots of bonus content, but also you get to support the show. And we really wouldn't be able to do this without your support. So we really thank you for that. Patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show. Now, if you can't afford that, if you can't swing that, and it is only 25 cents a day, Monday through Friday, if you can't swing that, then you can still become a Patreon supporter at patreon.com/The Katie Halper Show at the $1 a month level, and that means you are paying $12 a year. Also, please do, if you haven't already, like the stream, give it a thumbs up. That's a great free way to support the show. If you haven't already, please do subscribe. We are, our next, I guess, milestone will be, we're at 452,000. So the next one, we really want to get to 500,000 subs, but we'll celebrate when we get to 475,000 subs. So let's get those numbers up. And we did take a bit of a hit when we got hacked. And is there anything else that I need to say? Brett? Oh, super chats. Okay. Thank you so much for becoming a new member. Cars. Thank you. Thank you so much. Fuzzy. I'll just leave it at that. Says M16. I forget. Is it M16 or M16?
MI6.
MI6. Okay, there you go. MI6, CIA, Mossad, and Ukraine, all the same team. And I should know MI6 because I do watch regularly that amazing show, Slow Horses, with Gary Oldman. Such a good actor. Okay. Thank you for the super chat, Albert Ortiz. Thank you, Mrish, Katie, we love you, and Mr. Ray McGovern too. Thank you for that. And thank you for this very generous super chat, Wade Worth. Thank you so much for that. I think that's about it. This was a great show. We will see you Friday when we have our next live show. We're going to do a daytime show. But you can always find us Tuesdays at 7 p.m. We also release clips every day. And there's a slight chance, Brad, I texted you about this. There's a slight chance I'm going to want to move our show next week from Tuesday to Wednesday. So keep your eyes on that, on the lookout for that. But that will be easy to communicate because we will just, I guess, have a little thing to tell you about that. That's it, right, Brad? Okay, now he's hate watching this, he said. I don't know what that is. What were you hate watching? The rest of that video?
No, I was giving you a hard time about saying you wanted to reschedule next week, and then I said, okay, now I'm hate watching.
Oh, it's meaning you're the ones. Well,
Jeez
I haven't.
Louise, I am batting like 0 for what? 0 for 2 today. Like the joke about turning the car around, and then
yeah, we'll have to talk
there
about
was people in the chat that they were like, I got it.
Okay, there you go. I'm glad I asked.
To be fair, they said they got it because they were old.
Oh,
so
got it. Okay.
you know.
Well, it's we'll have to see. I think it's fair for me to say it may not be on Tuesday. I didn't commit to it, but it may not be on Tuesday next week. Because if it is on Tuesday, they'll see us, and if it has to be later, then they'll find out. Because
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
it's not like if I was trying to make it on Monday, that wouldn't be okay.
You know, when I was growing up and we didn't have tablets or anything in the car, my dad would give me and my sister math problems, and we would compete to see who could figure it out first. And that's how he kept us from like going crazy in the back seat of the car.
You're older though, right? So wouldn't you always, or is she better at math?
No. Well, yeah, I think
that's kind of unfair for her.
Sure, yeah. Though my nephew, I don't know, he's pretty impressive at math, and he's only 6.
Right, but that would require that his younger for you to like disprove my thesis, we need to know the younger one was better. Because I know your nephew is amazing at math. It's insane.
Yeah, that wouldn't be. I don't think that would be a fair match.
Right. Brad has very cute nephews. Yeah, that's all.
But yeah, it stuck with me, and so whenever I'm like, I don't know, at a bodega or something, and just like doing basic math like really fast in my head, and people look at me like I'm Rain Man or something. And just because you didn't grow up with calculators and everything, I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I am older than dirt.
Yeah. Well, I wouldn't say that. That's not very nice. Well, all right. Well, this was a great show, and thank you everyone so much for watching. And all of those guests were amazing. And we will see you Friday. Bye, everyone.
I did everything right and they indicted me.
And I don't know what the I'm doing.
Antifa!